Yeah, absolutely. Today he wasn't pulling any punches, Shahan. I suspect that the living office and being in the position where he is, where in a way the chickens are coming home to roost in the sense that this case is now back firmly before the courts, has sort of freed up former President Jacob Zuma to really speak his mind. I mean, he was sort of hinting towards the end of last year about what he really thinks, but now he really speaks out his mind. So he does say that this is a case that was about politics when it started. It is about politics even today, and he says he's being pursued because he is championing radical economic transformation, even rallying and saying that everywhere you're seeing black people living in difficult conditions, hinting at the United States and saying that you see black people being abused there, you see black people being abused in the UK and everywhere else. And from what he heard today from the speeches, black people have finally said enough is enough. And also talking about how people are sort of trying to paint him as someone who's guilty even before he's gone to trial. And interestingly, saying that people are lucky, those who tarnish his name, because nowadays, you know, you can no longer beat up people, and says that these are the kind of people that he would have given a whipping back in the days. In fact, he repeated that quite a number of times, may have been about 4 times or so, that indeed people are lucky that they can tarnish my name and nothing happens. If it was at a time when you could still smack people or whip people or beat them up, I would have done exactly that. So very interesting words coming from the former president, Jacob Zuma, indicating that they have every intention to challenge the decision made by Sean Abrams for the prosecution to go ahead following that judgment, of course, of the Supreme Court last year.
He even raised questions about the number of charges, of course, saying that, you know, previously there were so many and now some are missing. He doesn't know where they've gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And also complaining about the fact that have you ever seen a situation where a case goes away and then all of a sudden about 13 years later it comes back, and then he hints at the delays that had to do with those recordings that were part of the transcription of the submissions that he made that led to the case being dropped in 2009, and says they've been talking, they in this case being opposition parties and its opponents, they've been talking about the so-called tapes and calling them Zuma tapes. You would swear that those tapes are recordings of me talking, but actually I was the subject of what those people were talking about in those tapes. Former President Zuma saying that he actually wishes that if and when this case goes ahead, those tapes and recordings can be played for South Africans to hear for themselves the kind of things that they've been complaining about. So he's saying that some of the people who are saying they want this case to go ahead, actually it's quite possible that at some point when the case does go ahead, they will wish for the case to be stopped, because lies will not stand up to the facts as they are laid bare.
And then taking a slight stab at opposition parties, saying that they don't know how to fight in Parliament, they do it outside of Parliament.
Yes, absolutely. He says the opposition basically fights their battles instead of fighting in Parliament. They fight in the courts. But they were not the only people in the former president's crosshairs. There was a subtle, and in fact it was so subtle that if you blinked you may have missed it. There was a subtle addressing of some of the politics that have played themselves out in the ANC leading up to this court appearance, where he basically talked about, you know, he didn't talk specifically about the directive of the National Executive Committee of the ANC that people who come here should come in their individual capacity and also not wear ANC regalia, but he merely hinted that there's a lot more going on to this particular case and, you know, those kinds of politics. But yeah, you could tell that he was sort of directing himself in that direction without really going down that path too much. Those who know what he was talking about knew exactly what he was talking about. But another thing that was interesting, Shahan, is the kind of you know, alliance that you are seeing. I mean, I was looking at that picture on the stage there, and my mind sort of rewinding to 2006, thereabouts. and you would have had figures such as Nzima Vavi, Blade Nzimande, and leaders of the ANC standing at that podium behind him, Women's League, Youth League people standing behind him there. In fact, on the stage there, and some of the people who shared the stage with him, you had people from National Funeral Professionals Association, you had Adil Nchabeleng of Transform SA, Saudi Mutsweneng, and you had Carl Niehaus. You also did have, of course, which makes it also interesting, Sihle Zikalala, who was until the dissolution of the leadership of KwaZulu-Natal ANC, the chairperson of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, and continues to be a key figure there, as well as Willis Mchunu. And we also did see Faith Mutambi being among the people that did make their way here to come and support the former president. Very interesting, makes the picture itself tells 1,000 words in terms of the kind of combination and the alliance, really, that has been around Zuma in 2009. In fact, it would be interesting to juxtapose the two pictures.
Yeah, times have changed and so has the support to us. Let's talk about Carl Niehaus a bit more, because it seems he was the one who came out outright and slammed the ANC for asking its members not to, come out in support of the president. I mean, that's not what the NEC said exactly, but that's what he says is the case.
Well, Carl Niehaus is categorical, Shahan. His story, in my view, is quite straight, because he's been consistent about it since yesterday, why he's here. In fact, he's repeated it, I think, about 3 times between arriving here yesterday and now. Basically, that one of the things that he remembers is that former President Zuma was among the first leaders who had been in exile, ANC leaders who had been in exile, who went to see him when he was in prison, Carl Niehaus, that is. And therefore, he says he believes in comradeship, and says comrades do not abandon each other, and therefore he's here to support former President Jacob Zuma based on that. But also he's not happy with the decision that discourages members of the ANC from wearing ANC regalia in coming out to support ANC leaders who may be appearing in courts. But he says he accepts it, he respects the decision, even though, in fact, that's been the sentiment among many of the speakers, that we may not agree with this decision, but we will respect it. And hence, certainly from the leadership perspective, they did wear their ordinary clothes, even though, of course, if you look at the picture behind me, and we did have a nice aerial shot of the crowd, many of them yellow, the black, green and gold of the ANC is the dominant color.
Yeah, all right. We're going to leave it right there. We'll get continuous updates from our senior political reporter, Thulasizwe Simelane. We also have Lester Kivit, Desin Thathia and Annika Larson, all there in KwaZulu-Natal. We are, of course, looking at all angles, all sides of the story.